Thank you very much, Richie. That was very kind of you to say so. It's my great pleasure to introduce and deliver this, the 5th annual Jim McVicker Memorial Lecture. And I think it is in many ways the starting pistol for the Scottish Socialist Party's 2026 Holyrood election campaign. Today's lecture addresses a very important issue in front of working people, as Richie has rightly said, and that issue is how to halt the rise of the hard right Reform UK in this country. And in these remarks, it's my intention to address where Reform UK came from, what ideology it is that they represent, why it has achieved the significant levels of support in both Scotland and in Britain as a whole, what are its prospects, and most importantly of all, how we push back as socialists, with socialist ideas, push back the support that they have engendered. First of all, I wanted to say this though. I wanted to take the opportunity, as Richie has just said there, to say a little about this lecture and Jim McVicker's legacy, if I can. Jim was a friend of mine and a comrade of mine for 40 years. He died, as you know, as a complication from arising from COVID in 2020, and we decided, as Richie quite rightly reminded us, to inaugurate this lecture for two reasons. First of all, it gave us the opportunity to pay tribute to Jim and the outstanding contribution to the socialist cause he made in Scotland over 40 years. And secondly, to use it as he would have wished, to inspire others with the socialist ideas that he believed in, to direct the Scottish Socialist Party's work going forward. I first met Jim McVicker when we were both Labour Party young socialists in Lanarkshire in the 1980s. He made an enormous contribution to the struggle for socialism in Scotland. He was, as Richie mentioned, a long-standing and highly valued member of the Scottish Socialist Party, with responsibility for managing our finances as the National Treasurer. And anybody who's been any kind of treasurer in the socialist movement will realise what a thankless task that is. It made the loaves and the fishes look like a birthday party. And he had to carry out that responsibility, Jim, as the National Treasurer, in the most trying of circumstances for the Scottish Socialist Party, when in 2007 we had to lay off the majority of our staff. A thankless task that had to be done. And amongst other responsibilities Jim had, it's rumoured that he was a lifelong Celtic supporter. And the result, I understand from Tannadice, shows that we all have to carry our burdens. He died, as I said, as a result of complications from COVID in 2020. And he's both a great loss to the Scottish Socialist Party, clearly a great loss to Celtic too. But he's in spirit, he's with us today. He's in our hearts today. And Jim McVicker would be humbled to find that our attention is focused on him at this meeting. For he was a modest man, as well as being a proud son of the international working class movement, as we are today. And I thought, when Richie asked me to deliver this this lecture, I thought of the attributes that Jim McVicker had and was able to call on to sustain a 40-year membership to the socialist cause. Because, as you know, it's not anybody and everybody who can do it. For 40 years, he sustained a cause, a support for the socialist cause. And I thought I might highlight that for a second, because it offers important lessons to those who would rush off and establish a new party at the drop of a hat. That has indeed been the case, as you know, in recent times. One only has to look at the smattering of little groups contesting the elections on May the 7th with deluded expectations to see the shortcomings in this approach. The Scottish Socialist Party, on the other hand, has been around for 30 years. 30 years. And we intend to be around for another 30, because the struggle for socialism and for independence in Scotland demands it. And Jim McVicker was a man who recognised the demands and met the demands head on. Political parties need to be serious. They need to be prepared for longevity when they're established. They need commitment. They need determination. They need structures, development plans, fundraising strategies, they need stamina, and they need to set targets that are years in advance. Politics today is full of posers and charlatans who are not serious and consequently never last. Jim McVicker wasn't one of them. He was made of Lanarkshire steel, and he taught us either to do things properly, seriously and diligently, or don't do them at all. An important lesson through life that's worth remembering. Our enemies recognise those key attributes, don't they? And that's what brings me to reform. Reform is a serious threat to working class people and the socialist movement. Reform threatens to push back all the gains that working class people and organised labour have made in Britain over the last 180 years, since the time of the Chartists, the world's first working class organisation. Their ideas in reform are an affront to progress. They're an affront to equality. They're an affront to human solidarity at home and abroad. And their rise marks the decline in class consciousness amongst working people, which has resulted from 50 years of defeats and setbacks electorally, industrially, and in political planes. And if you need reminding of that, ask yourself, who would have thought in 1982, when I met Jim McVicker, that the trade union movement in Britain would fall to single figures in the private sector? Who would have thought in 1982 that a quarter of the hospitals in Scotland would be owned by private companies and run for profit, and that position had developed under a Labour administration? Who would have thought in 1982 that back then, if a US president, let's say like Ronald Reagan, had kidnapped the leader of a foreign country in the dead of night and dragged him off to a New York City jail, like Donald Trump did with Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, who would have thought that there wouldn't be mass protests involving tens of millions of people around the world surrounding American embassies everywhere? And the truth is, nowadays, the far right are on the rise. The far right are on the rise in the Western world. Trump in America, Modi in India, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, National Rally in France, Vox in Spain, the Brotherhood in Italy, and Reform UK as well as throughout Eastern Europe. And when Jim and I became activists, the Soviet Union was still intact. And for its many failings, and they had failings, but it nonetheless acted as a bulwark against Western imperialism and colonialism. And it offered an alternative geopolitical pole to capitalism. Unfortunately, the political centre of gravity in the world, in Britain and Scotland since then, has moved to the right. Class consciousness has fallen back since Jim and I were young socialists. And so has serious organised resistance to the bosses and their increasingly exploitative and ruthless system. So the first lesson I want you to recognise about the rise of reform is without these defeats for the working class, reform wouldn't exist today. That's the background. The working class internationally would have routed them in the 1980s, 90s and decades before this. Now, despite the grotesque inequalities, the greater exploitation and the never-ending wars, we are told that military might is right. A philosophy allied to that which says, because billionaires and bond markets say so, they must be right, because they say so, and they must be heeded. Each new generation is encouraged to be the next Elon Musk, not the next Che Guevara, not the next Nelson Mandela, but the next Elon Musk. We live in warmongering times where neoliberal capitalism believes that political conflicts can only be solved by military means. Well, we're here today to say wrong, wrong, wrong. Society has moved to the right, and in some quarters, people are led to believe that the blame must be apportioned on the poor, on immigrants, on the disabled, that they're somehow responsible for the failures of capitalism. The victim-blaming culture that we as socialists have to confront and challenge every day. And I want to say this, Richie, I take my hat off to each and every one of you today for standing up for socialist ideas against that background, for joining the Scottish Socialist Party, for shouldering the onerous responsibilities that membership of the socialist movement demands day in and day out in these difficult times. And I have to say, my experience, I'm sure other people in the room, there's great advantage to be gained by reading the work of Antonio Gramsci, who was imprisoned in the 1920s and 30s by Mussolini. Gramsci had that famous phrase, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. That's the Scottish Socialist Party. For all that litany of despair that's out there, those setbacks, our optimism is unquenchable because at root we have our faith in the working class people are fighting back with a leadership and a direction. So I take my hat off to everybody in the socialist movement in this round and around the world in the last 40 years who stood their ground, who haven't run away, who haven't run over to the other side like so many others. We're right. We're right in the positions that we take. And I have to say, I look at that as a background, and I look at Reform's electoral rise in the last year and a half. In 2024 general election, Reform won 14% of the vote, and they got 6 MSPs elected, 20% behind Labour. A year later, they were at 34% in the polls, with a 9% lead over Keir Starmer. Today, they've got 250,000 members and £10 million in the bank. If there were a general election held today, we're told, Reform would win more than 330 seats and perhaps even an overall majority. They've maintained that lead in the polls for a year. And I'm sure you'll bear that in mind through the course of the next few remarks. But while you are, I want you to look below the surface of those figures. Because underneath these figures lies a deeper truth with stark warnings for our movement. I attended the Durham Miners' Gala in 2023. Anybody here been there? Put your hands up if you've been to the Durham Miners' Gala. Just me and Bill and a comrade there, and we weren't even there the same year, so we've covered 3 years between us. I went to the Durham Miners' Gala in 2023. It's a fabulous event, the biggest working class gathering in Western Europe, one every socialist should have in their bucket list. I'd never been before. I went, and I would encourage you to go. It's inspiring, not to be missed. From 8 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a constant procession of noisy, colourful banners and bands parading through the ancient city of Durham, in this walled city where the miners once ruled the roost. In the northeast of England, it's referred to as the Big March. The city's long-closed racecourse, the only place big enough in the vicinity to accommodate the numbers involved. Speeches are made, there's carnival, fairground rides, marquees to accommodate all the unions and socialist groups that are there exhibiting their wares. And when I was there in 2023, it took place in glorious sunshine like today. And it's safe to say it's part and parcel of a deeply embedded culture in the northeast of England in particular, where the entire working class has long seen this day as one of their own, and they're as passionate about the Durham Miners' Gala as they are about Newcastle United or Sunderland, the two local football teams. The year I went, Sinead and Lauren and I went with the Scottish Socialist Party flags. And the reason I'm telling you this story is, when I returned to Edinburgh, I said to my wife, Zella, we should go to Durham for the weekend. I want to see the place in a less frenetic atmosphere where there's maybe more room to stretch your arms and legs. And we did. And we went, when we were there, to see the famous Beamish Industrial Museum. I don't know if people have been to Beamish. You should definitely go and see that too. It's near a village called Stanley. And you'd be thinking, thank God Colin's getting to the point, because this is about Stanley. Not Stanley Baxter. Not Stanley from Laurel and Hardy. The village of Stanley is important for our story today because uniquely in Britain, the streets are named after its political heroes. That in and of itself is not unique to towns and villages in Britain. But in Stanley, the streets are named after Keir Hardie Way. in the former pit village, Lenin Avenue, it's Vladimir and not John, Karl Marx Street, Engels Crescent. Its political heroes were the men and women who founded the Labour Party in 1900 and led the Russian Revolution in 1919. This small village in Durham, throughout the 20th century, elected many a communist councillor, as you can imagine. Yet in May last year, such was their revulsion at Starmer's Labour government and its record that they elected 4 reform councillors in that village and sent them to Durham County Council. Think about that for a second. The reddest of the red coalfields in Britain had become a reform UK redoubt. That's a staggering reflection of how things have changed politically in these isles. Unless you think that, oh, Colin, that's terrible, but it couldn't possibly happen in Scotland. Well, let me tell you this. Our canvassing experience in Edinburgh over the past 3 months, in the Inch, where myself and Hugh live, in Broomhouse, in Pilton, where Natalie lives, in Stenhouse, in Wrestlerig, Drylaw, and the other schemes we leafleted, suggest that it's not a phenomenon that's contained in Stanley, because there you can taste the support for reform. You can taste it with your tongue, such as the revulsion felt towards Labour in particular. Now, I'm not claiming, to be clear, that these are the advanced layers of the working class in Scotland. They're not. Rather, these are ordinary working people in the schemes who are sick and tired of politicians, in particular Labour. They're desperate for help, and they don't know who to turn to. And might I say this in passing to make it contemporary? In those schemes, and I suggest it's the same anywhere else, we didn't find an iota of support, unfortunately, for Jeremy Corbyn's Your Party. That wasn't the case. So let's be clear about this. The rise of reform could not have occurred without Labour's political treachery. The Labour Party is responsible for reform running at 33-34% in these isles. Social democracy, which Labour represents, has become, in this epoch, neoliberalism's reserve party. It's abandoned even the pretense of standing up to market forces, standing up for working people, state intervention in the anarchic boss's economic system. And yet that was the task that social democracy worldwide was charged with in 1900 when Keir Hardie established the Labour Party, and in Germany with SPD. That was its historic task. And here we are in 2026. Failed so badly that they don't even try. So those people who feel that they've been betrayed by a Labour government are entitled to that sentiment. Keir Starmer's popularity is the lowest on record since any poll began as a Prime Minister. Not only based on failing to address the cost of living crisis and the ruthless inequalities behind 21st century neoliberal capitalism, but more importantly on his repeated attacks on working class people, on his warmongering and his ugly flag-waving patriotism after 20 years of the Tories. That's what we get. And such is the antipathy directed towards Keir Starmer after is because of his cap on the child benefit, his betrayal of the WASPy women and their pension rights, his withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance, his attack on the personal independence payments made to the disabled. Many look at that and they look to see, who does Keir Starmer hate the most? They look around and they see Nigel Farage, and they conclude tactically, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. To me, that's part and parcel of Rise's reform, and the rise in reform, and the reason they've got the numbers there. History shows, my friends, that such naivety brings such hard lessons. The Scottish Socialist Party refused to fall into that trap. Why? Because it's also possible that the enemy of my enemy can also be my enemy. And in the case of Reform UK, it is. It is. Nigel Farage's anti-establishment image is a sham. Nothing could be further from the truth. The guy's a charlatan and a fraud. desperate to be accepted by the UK establishment, the monarchy, the boardrooms, the banks, the military academies. And the polls have enticed some elements of big business to take Farage on board after initially shunning him. And I'll give you two examples. The chair of the Nationwide Building Society, for example, a guy called Kevin Parry, has begun engaging in what he calls, quote, a constructive dialogue with Farage, Nationwide Building Society. Not to be outdone, the chair of JCB, which is the big earth-moving equipment manufacturer, Sir Anthony Bamford, who happens to hold the distinction as the biggest donor to the Conservative Party over the last quarter of a century, is now bestowing his money on reform instead. And those of us familiar with the politics of Germany in the 1920s and 30s might see a parallel here, mightn't you? Because in the 1920s and 30s, the big industrialists initially shunned Adolf Hitler, didn't they? And then they moved to him for searching for stability, order, national pride in the face of the Bolshevik menace. Now, this isn't to say that Farage is a Nazi. He's not a Nazi. He's a far-right English nationalist. That should be bad enough for you. And it's important to appreciate the difference. He's besotted by Parliament, desperate to be accepted there. He's not out to destroy the institutions of government, commerce or society. His origins are in the hard right of the Tory party. Reform are a party of reactionary, conservative, right-wing English nationalists in the hang 'em and flog 'em brigade tradition, anti-immigrant, intolerant of minorities, anti-socialist certainly, in favour of small state, anti-welfare, pro-business party. And at the same time, they attack the rights of organised working class people vociferously. They intend to drive down the pay and conditions, pensions and other rights of organised workers in the same way that Thatcher did. Under them, both unemployment and underemployment will rise and living standards will fall. We have been warned. We have been warned. So what are its prospects going forward? Well, as things stand, Reform is standing at 15% in the polls in Scotland, nearly 30% UK-wide. And it's set to get between 12 and 15 MSPs at Holyrood on May the 7th. They tap into the frustrations of a section of society that are beyond the hard right, who are furious at Starmer and furious at the emptiness of what Tariq Ali calls the extreme centre. The extreme centre, the extreme politics of centrist parties like Labour and the SNP. And what's its prospects going forward? Well, if you read magazines like The Economist, The Spectator, The New Statesman, the quality press like the Financial Times, The Times, The Daily Telegraph, you find the view that Farage is on course to be the next UK Prime Minister, don't you? At the same time, Farage is attempting to move toward the centre, to ameliorate the rough edges. That's where he sees a political majority can be achieved at Westminster. So the question arises, how likely is that? Is it inevitable? And more importantly for us, what can we do to counteract it? And the answer is plenty. There's plenty we can do. The first thing is we need to, first of all, challenge the political ground that they inhabit. They portray themselves as anti-establishment, and of course are nothing of the kind. The membership, as Richie touched on, the membership of Reform overwhelmingly comes from the Conservative Party, and yet its voter base overwhelmingly comes from ex-Labour voters. There's a contradiction there that they can't square. They're political opportunists who've got no answers to the underlying crisis of British capitalism. They argue for a small state and then realise they need to expand public services because their base are poor white working class who depend upon them. On an immigration, they seek to divide and conquer the working class with xenophobic, intolerant dog whistle politics, don't they? We need to expose their politics, not just as reactionary, but as unworkable and dangerous. Their economic policies are illiterate. Their immigration policies are ignorant as well as dangerous. Their English nationalism signifies a desire to return to the lost days of empire. They're little Englanders who won't be able to cope with the breakup of the British state and its historical decline. So how do we counter their influence? Specifically by opposing their ideas and standing up against them in elections like this one. Specifically by being on the streets and in trade union branches and in community meetings and in protests and all gatherings where working class people might be influenced by their propaganda, and by presenting our own analysis of the problems working class people face and socialist solutions. And I have to say, our message is essentially yes to reforms, no to Reform UK. That's what we're arguing, isn't it? And those actions and words go together. And here's a specific way to fight the threat reform poses. In the upcoming Holyrood elections, we want to persuade people to give us their second vote for the Scottish Socialist Party. And as things stand, the polls make it clear that many people are going to be voting for the SNP to stop reform, aren't they? The SNP's at 35% support in Scotland. It's not at 35% support because of the record of the last 19 years, is it? It's in part to do with people are voting for the SNP to stop reform and to stop reform getting representatives in the Scottish Parliament. So our message to people who are voting for the SNP to stop reform is it's all very well in the first past the post constituencies to vote for reform, but it's utterly ineffectual on the list. Utterly ineffectual. By voting for the SNP on the list, they can't win any seats because the system is designed that first past the post seats will count against them. Candidly speaking, a vote for the SNP and the second vote helps reform most of all, because it puts 250,000 votes in the bin. My message to people who want to halt the rise of the hard right is to vote for the Scottish Socialist Party, not the SNP. Put socialists back in the Parliament again. And that was the gist of the column we wrote in the National this week. Backing up our words by building a base in working class communities. Yes, it's hard, painstaking, demanding, requires both intelligence and immense effort, as well as an understanding of tactics that can work in the circumstances. And may I refer you to one thing? My attention was drawn this week by comrades in the party about the lessons the Belgian Workers' Party learned in this regard. Well worth studying. Perhaps another issue for another lecture. But the Belgian Workers' Party have put into effect in recent times their work against the hard right Vlaams bloc that they encountered in Belgium, and now build considerable support that in many cities, in both sides of Belgium, in the Wallonian French speaking side, and Flanders, the Dutch speaking side, where there now majority support in working class communities in many cities of Belgium. And there's lessons the Scottish Socialist Party can learn from that. And I'm sure they did it by joining the protests, by flying their flags, demonstrating their presence, explaining their view, socialist views, and publishing material on all the protests that they engage in. And the Scottish Socialist Party will do the same. We need to strengthen our own forces. That's the best way to counteract the rise of reform, is to build the branches, build the membership, build the Scottish Socialist Party. Perhaps my overriding message to this lecture today. And in conclusion, let me say this, Richie and Jamie. Question is it too late to stop reform winning 15 seats or so in May at the Scottish Parliament? My answer would be, candidly, probably. Because that damage has been done by Labour, by the SNP and the Tories. Yet it's also true that the conflict will continue on May the 8th. May the 8th will follow May the 7th as usual this year. I bring you that great revolution. Revelation? Revolution. Sounds like the Book of Revolutions. Has Reform's electoral support peaked? Quite possibly. You know, I mentioned Stanley before. The result of a by-election for Durham County Council took place on the 5th of March, not in Stanley, but in a place called Murton. And Reform lost the seat that they won last year. They lost the seat. They were expected to hold it. They lost it. We're also reminded of Caerphilly, you know, the by-election for the Welsh Assembly. Reform expected to win it and lost. It was won, as you remember, by Plaid Cymru. And the Gorton and Denton by-election, they expected to win it and they lost it. So perhaps their support has peaked. But my message would rather be there's no room for complacency here. Not least of all because these defeats were not inflicted by the left. These were inflicted as a result of tactical voting by centrist opponents as well as the left, weren't they? Greens and Plaid Cymru and others. Reform won't disappear on their own. They have to be challenged and defeated politically. Fight back or go under. That was what Jim McVicker taught us. You fight back or you go under. If you fight back intelligently, determinedly, and be successful. The SSP, the Scottish Socialist Party, are determined to succeed with the mobilised strength of working class people behind us, because no other force can deliver our ultimate goal of an independent socialist Scotland and a modern democratic republic. We have the optimism of the will in our ideas. And you know, people say to me, I'm sure they say this to Richie, I'm sure they say it to other people, Colin, they'll say, you've been working as a revolutionary socialist since 1983. And you acknowledge that it's harder today than it was in 1940 when you... 1940? 40 years ago. That's just you, you're still awake then. It's harder than it was 40 years ago when you started. And they say to me, on camera and elsewhere, what is it that keeps you going? And my answer is, we're right. That's what keeps us going. We're right. These ideas... We're right to want an alternative to the warmongering butchery we see in the Middle East and Ukraine and elsewhere. We're right to want a world based on fulfilling the primary needs of every human being, rather than the luxuries of the exploited few. We're right to recognise that socialism offers the world a far better vision than we have today, and we refuse to accept failure, exploitation, greed and ruthlessness. And the disregard for our fellow human beings is all there is, because it isn't. Last Saturday, I attended and spoke at an independence conference in Glasgow alongside Jim Sillars. He's 88-year-old now. And he argued that those of us who believe in an independent socialist Scotland, that's you and I, at least him and us, he argued that we should appreciate that we're at what he called an inflection point today, with several insignificant factors at play. And among the many points he made to make his case, he referred to a recent survey of young Scots, which found that 25% of them felt they had no future to look forward to. 25% of young Scots who feel they've got no future to look forward to. And I could tell he was broken-hearted by that statistic, not least of all because his attitude is when he was 25-year-old, he could have played for Scotland. He could have won the Open Golf Championship. He could have done anything. The world was in front of them. The world was his oyster. And he's heartbroken by the idea that 25% of young people in this country believe there's nothing down for them, as they say in Richie's native Liverpool. Nothing down for them. And the truth of the matter is, we know in the Scottish Socialist Party that 25% are the poorest, aren't they? They're the 25% in the working class schemes of Scotland. That we as a party know better than any party. Any party. We live there. That's our community. These are our future generations. That statistic is both truly shocking and an indictment of how capitalism has robbed a generation of their hope, their optimism and their sense of purpose, and its important implications also for the socialist movement. And yet when you think about it, that also happens to be the generation that are most deeply and profoundly committed to independence in all the statistics and all the figures, don't they? They're the ones who are holding on to independence as the one way forward for a much better place. So, comrades, let's resolve today to mobilise those young people in particular to show that they are, in fact, as Jim Sillars and Jim McVicker fully understood and concluded, that they are, in fact, the hope, the cause, and the future of humankind itself. Thank you very much.